Hello and welcome to our first action-packed Sibos afternoon show, Sibos Today. I'm Nadine Dereza. Well, Sibos Today is a more reflective look at the highlights of Sibos 2015 so far. And my first guest to discuss the opening plenary session are Dan Lattimore, who's Senior Vice President of Celent's banking practice. And Celent, of course, is the financial research and consulting firm. And joining him is the journalist Tom Groenfeldt, who reports on financial and technology stories at Forbes. Welcome to you both.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm very impressed actually because you've both done your homework listening into the speech, so thank you very much for doing that. And when you look back to last year, we had an amazing speech by Michelle J. Howard, who was the Navy Admiral from the United States of America. And I looked at this speech today from Piyush Gupta, the Chief Executive of the DBS Group, and I was really impressed actually. Here was a man who knew his stuff. Tom, what was your impression?
I thought he was very optimistic and maybe overly optimistic. I've just written a story for International Finance magazine that said that the economies in Asia have flatlined for 4 years and people are still thinking it's an exception or an aberration. But that an economist from JP Morgan I talked to thinks that the world has changed a lot, and the speech today seemed to think that this still has huge potential. So I was really interested in that other point of view.
And how about for you, Dan?
For me, the notion that Asia is a bellwether that the rest of the world should really be paying attention to in terms of its young demographic, its mobilely driven consumers, its willingness to transact via new channels with new kinds of companies was fascinating. And I think Western companies and economists should be paying a lot of attention to those trends.
And you made a real point about the Asia 10 having that advantage of having young people, giving that fresh vibrancy to the marketplace, and compared it with America and also Europe and the aging population trend there. Interesting you didn't mention China though.
As far as demographics?
Yes.
Yeah, because I don't know the numbers, but I think China's facing a demographic cliff, and you see those things 30 or 40 years out. They're very predictable.
And in terms of the key messaging that he spoke about, I mean, Singapore he sees as real that heartbeat of those Asian economies. And he also mentioned that over the years, this area and the countries around it have really stormed all those economic crises, and they will come and go, these crises, and yet the strength of those economies will still go on from strength to strength. Do you share that vision?
Over the long term, absolutely. There will be blips, but as you look at the long-term trend, and as he mentioned, the notion that these economies are going to go from 40% of US GDP a couple of decades ago to 120% in the course of a couple of generations is staggering. And a large part of that is due to population growth.
Absolutely. And what were the other key highlights for you? What did you concur with him?
I'll tell you, a key highlight that was missing was governance, and I can understand the CEO of a bank doesn't want to talk about which economies, which countries are well governed and which aren't. But I think Singapore is just so superbly governed, and it's just sort of a model of how to plan a country and have a strong government, which, you know, coming from the United States where can't pass a highway bill, it's really impressive to see what a strong government can do.
But he also flagged the future that if Singapore really wanted to stay ahead of the game, it needed to change its modus of operation.
Well, it was fascinating as a history lesson. 50 years ago, Singapore's value proposition essentially was to start out as first world infrastructure in a third world region. And he made the point that's no longer going to be sufficient. What they're trying instead to do is be a future city, which includes, because there are only 5 million people on an island, the ability to go from a port, goods coming in, going through customs, going into the financial system, all seamlessly. And they're not there yet, but even having that vision and being able to make it work in this relatively contained laboratory is going to be fascinating to watch.
Do you think they've got the capability to actually do that?
Absolutely. They've got the imagination and they do have the capability. It won't be easy, but this is a great test bed for much bigger, much more unwieldy and more unpredictable kinds of economies. And if they can show that it works here, they'll give hope to others.
Now, how about those new incumbents, those new kids on the block that are giving this industry a real run for their money? And he mentioned Alibaba a few times, but you could also talk about Amazon and their low business model as well in terms of transaction costs. You've also got the other new players coming in, whether it's Google, PayPal. What was your take on that?
Again, I thought he was very, very optimistic because the banks have the systems to do that, but they have such a hard time organizing even modest improvements internally that I could see them just missing out and just being the back office for the more imaginative newcomers in financial tech.
Well, in terms of the infrastructure, though, isn't that their advantage?
He listed three very interesting advantages: the infrastructure, the trust that people have, and he posed the hypothetical: if you had $1 million, would you put it with Amazon or PayPal or Facebook, or would you rather have a bank? And then their risk management expertise. And others have also talked about just the ability to deal with the regulators. And that is an overwhelming value proposition. I think is kind of a weak leg to stand on. But banks know they've got to change, and that's a necessary but not sufficient condition. They've started, but they've got a long way to go. But with this pressure from behind, there will be winners and there will be others who won't be able to adapt.
And I suppose the key themes of this conference are things: connect, debate, and collaborate. Do you get a sense that this conference has got a new purpose now, with a new vision, that it needs to really hit the ground running and tackle these new players coming on board? Dan?
I think they are realizing the world has changed. Banks traditionally have not played that well with others, and that is no longer going to work. They're going to have to enter into this really messy world of co-opetition, where their partners are at the same time their competitors, at the same time are their customers. And that's a different mindset. It takes some getting used to, but the winners will be those who over time are able to actually make that change.
And how about from a regulation point of view? Any thoughts on that?
Well, regulators will probably hold things back. And they might give the incumbents a disadvantage because the newcomers can move faster. I think there's a real chance that, you give $1 million and you're $1 million stuck in Barclays or DBS, but then you use a bunch of other fintech companies to do robo-investing and algorithmic trading, and the bank is sitting there with some of the expenses and doing the risk management, and all the real value is moved elsewhere. So I think that's a real possibility for banks.
And your final impressions then of the speech? I'm going to come to you. I don't think you were so quite optimistic as Dan. Tom?
Yeah, I think there's some huge challenges ahead, and I think overall Asia just has this huge population and huge growth potential, but it's going to take some smart governance to figure out how to work it. It sounds like China's doing some of that too.
Tom?
I think he talked about Singapore and Asia, but he also talked about the banks, and he did give the banks hope. They have great potential to survive, but they've got to change radically. And again, spurred by these new incumbents or these new attackers, they have the chance, and they can learn some great lessons. But they've got to undergo some significant cultural and technological changes.
Brilliant, and I know your name really is Dan, although I called you Tom, but thank you for answering anyway. Gentlemen, I really appreciate you taking notes, analysing that speech for us. That's terrific. Thank you very much for your time. We're now going to look at the second of our Discover Singapore films, and this time Steve and I took a ride on the largest Ferris wheel in the world, yes, the Singapore Flyer. Well, this is the Singapore Flyer, Stephen, and it's the largest Ferris wheel in the world. Got some spectacular views of the city, your city.
Well, yes, we've come at a good time because it is a wonderful, clear night where you can actually see quite far. Oh, okay, let me highlight some of the features out there. I mean, that one brightly lit, obviously, well, a golf course, one of the few we have in the country. But what's interesting also, over there where you see a bit of a dome with a kind of a crack in the middle and some light coming through, that is our sports hub, Singapore Sports Hub.
And what sports are playing
basically,
there?
well, anything and everything. So That's the Sports Hub. Right below us, actually, what we're doing, if you come during the Formula One season, we have the F1 night race. We are literally over the track right now. This is actually where the pits are. This would be where you would see a lot of the cars pulling in at this stretch just down here. I mean, this is the actual racetrack. It's a night race in the city. The roads get closed off in many of the surrounding areas nearby here.
So a bit like Monaco.
A bit
France.
like, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And is it a spectacle? Do all the crowds come out, especially for
the first time I saw it, and I looked at it on television when they showed us that wide shot up in the sky because it's all lighted. The entire track is lighted. It was amazing. Many of us were, wow, this is our country. This is it's like this is quite unique. This is real. So that was wonderful. And then what you have literally is the water. That bridge over there, the highway taking you all the way right down to the airport. But waterfront housing on both sides. And if we look to the left over there, in fact, that is the central business district. So that's where all the offices are.
So the real financial hub is here.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
I mean, it's amazing, Singapore, isn't it? Because it's a country that works. People feel that it's neutral. It attracts all sorts of foreign investment. I mean, why do you love Singapore so much, Stephen?
Well, I'm a bit biased because I am Singaporean, and I have grown up here, and it's just a unique place because it really is a melting pot of cultures. I have so many friends from different races, and we really, we've grown up together. We've been here together all our lives, and you don't even think about it at that point in time about there being a different race or different religions or things like that.
So let's go to the other side of the capsule, and this dome really captures my eye. Now, I know that one's called the Flower Dome. How about the one adjacent to it?
And the Cloud Dome. I think the two, one of them has plants and trees they have in there. The other one actually has a waterfall inside it, supposedly where they recreate the effects of what it would like to be at that level and that climate and the kind of plants that would grow with it.
That's the largest greenhouse in the world. Did you know that?
I'm learning something new right now.
Yeah. And tell us about this marina area here, because that looks lovely. I can see a few boats coming in and out. I mean, this is quite a hive of activity as well, isn't it?
Right.
Great nighttime spot.
So what they've done is also keep many of the older buildings. For example, if you look at the Fullerton Hotel, that was the original post office, the main headquarters of the post office here in Singapore. So that building has been conserved and converted into a hotel. Across from it, again, all the buildings, by the water. One of them used to be the pier where ships could come in. Well, this was a trading port, and at the time, it wasn't so busy. It wasn't a business district in that sense. So this building, which kind of looks like a palm, is actually the art museum. It was meant specifically designed to be iconic, I think.
So how's it changed over the years, since you've been here, born and bred here? What differences have you seen, particularly in the last few years? I think Marina by the Bay
area,
that's a brand new $1 billion spent, so a lot of investment going on.
Yes.
What other changes have you seen?
I think we just keep building, hopefully, until we run out of space. But I mean, that came in, the Marina Bay area came to life when we brought in the casino as well, so there were 2 casinos that were brought into Singapore, one of them at the Marina Bay area. And that's of course integral with the kind of industries and businesses we like to encourage coming into Singapore, because I think we like to pride ourselves on the fact that generally things work, when you come here, it works, and it works fairly efficiently. So I think that's what people have come to like.
I hope you enjoyed that film. I tell you what, it was such a thrill to see Singapore at night from such a height. And if you're interested in going on the fly, it's open until 10:30 every night and well worth experiencing. Well, my next guest is Christian Sarafidis, who's the head of marketing for Swift. Christian, a very warm welcome to you.
Hello, how are you, Nadine?
Very well, thank you. And I know you've seen the opening plenary. So having heard that plenary, what do you think are the key challenges facing your industry?
This was clearly highlighted actually during the opening plenary. I'd like to mention 3. The one is regulation, the other one is technology, and in technology I would put certainly the digitalization of finance and cyber, and the third one, the global shift. So if you look at regulation, the financial crisis has triggered a lot of changes or even transformation, I would say, in the industry, and this will continue over time, we believe. Now, as far as the technology is concerned, well, there are two things that are important in the financial services industry. The digitalization of finance that everybody is talking about. So that's something very, very high on the agenda. You certainly have heard about cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, distributed ledgers, etc. So that's very interesting. We're going to have a lot of session on this during this Sibos.
Especially in inner tribe sessions.
Absolutely. Today actually there was a session on Bitcoin, and the room was so packed that we had to use another area which was also very, very packed. So absolutely right. The other challenge that the industry is definitely facing is cyber. And I would say that prevention on cyber threat will definitely continue over time.
So those are the key three areas for you. Are those the topics that you think are going to be focused on for Sibos, or is there anything else that you think everybody's attention should be put towards?
Yeah, there are certain number of topics that will be discussed at length. So I would like to pick the one on correspondent banking. You know, it's driven by a certain number of factors. So digitalization is one of them, but also the change of behavior of the clients. They want to have more real-time experience to drive the cost down, to have the real-time. I already mentioned the transparency I wanted to add. So all of this is going to transform this industry in the long term. And what is the role of SWIFT there is to assess the need to think about new models in the future. We will do this in a collaborative mode with the community.
Well, many industries, though, consumers seem to be ahead of the game, and it's a catch-up. As we consumers want things quick and we want them fast and we want them now. Is that a challenge, though, that you welcome and you sort of seize the initiative and look forward to? Yeah,
absolutely. And what has been said in the open plenary, I like it very much. We would like to see ourselves as the innovative incumbents. So we are there actually to provide the operational excellence. We are known for the security, the resiliency and the availability. But on top of that, we need to look at all these changes and the challenges in the future and bring this innovation. And we have launched actually a quite important campaign here during the Sibos called Make the Real World Change, which reflects on how SWIFT is innovating for the community. And the innovation doesn't come from SWIFT, it comes from what the community is telling us. So we're consulting the community, and I can give you some examples of what has been innovated in the past year. So in the area of compliance, for example, to meet the challenges on the compliance and financial crime in particular, we have built a roadmap, a complete roadmap. We started with a screening engine as an example, and now going forward, we're extending this to become a full compliance services utility. Another area of innovation in the compliance area is the KYC. Last year at Sibos, we were just talking about KYC. Now it's a reality. A year later, and we already have over 1,500 institutions already registered to the KYC.
And they're great examples. And earlier on, we also heard about the strategy for 2020, the 5-year cycle. So with SWIFT launching the new strategy this year for the next 5 years, let's focus on the year ahead, 2016. What do you actually see coming up on that agenda in particular and beyond?
Yeah. So first of all, I will say something personal, if you don't mind. So the architect of this strategy was Javier, and my role, I'm quite new in my role, is to materialize, to execute this strategy. So that's very exciting for myself. And the way we are designing strategy at SWIFT is quite important. As we are a cooperative, we are consulting our community. And what has the community told us last year? First of all, continue the core markets of SWIFT where we are present in the payments, in the securities. Don't compromise on the operational excellence as I just mentioned, but they're also giving us some directions towards innovation. I already mentioned the innovation, but real-time regulation or continue to develop the compliance roadmap. And you will not be surprised that our strategy is articulated about this theme. So continue to focus on the core business and grow it, and then at the same time innovate in the MI space and in the compliance space. In the core business, in payment, the challenges of the correspondent banking, how to rejuvenate the correspondent banking is definitely one of them. And if we're looking at the MIs, huge amount is going on the MIs, real time as an example. But everything around 2022 is also very, very important. And to pick one example, tomorrow afternoon there will be a very important event on the standards stand. 11 market infrastructure are going to sign a charter to adopt common practice around 20022. So many things are happening. And the compliance area, same thing. What I said earlier, we are going to continue to elaborate and work on this compliance services utility.
So it sounds like you've got your work cut out, and
Absolutely.
if your energy is anything to go by, I can quite see you fulfilling and executing all these visions and plans by 2020. So when you look to 2020, what do you think you'll be talking about, and what do you hope you'll have accomplished together with the industry?
Yeah. It's quite difficult to project ourselves in 2020, this 5 years down the road. And if you reflect back on the 2015 strategy, regulation was not a hot topic like it is today. So I believe this topic will remain over time by 2020. In terms of technology, maybe there will be the next big thing that will pop up. But what we for sure know is that interesting technologies like distributed ledger technologies will come to the next level of maturity. It's not exactly the case right now as we've seen in the opening plenary, but we expect this to come to the next level. And the other thing I would like to also to highlight is that the role of SWIFT as a cooperative is to do economy of scale. And how we can achieve this is by growing the volume. And the way to engage with the community is the collaboration. And what has been said, and again I'm repeating what has been said in the opening plenary, our keynote speaker Piyush Gupta said, actually one of your core value is not only standards of the network, it is the platform for collaboration that you're providing to the community.
And coming to Sibos, you get that sense of collaboration.
Absolutely.
With over 8,000 people. What was the figure?
8,035.
And counting.
It is the second largest Sibos ever. All
Wow.
Sibos included. That's very impressive.
And obviously we've still got to count the figures because there's a few more people to come through the doors
This
yet.
number will grow by Thursday for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking forward to finding out the final tally. Christian Serafadis, as ever, a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Nadine.
Well, earlier, my co-presenter, Stephen, had the great good fortune to start our big interview series with Ather Williams, who's Head of Global Transaction Services at Bank of America Merrill Lynch.
Ather, thanks for joining us here on Sibos TV.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Singapore as well. You know, I know it's been a bit of a long flight, but you finally made it. So we want to pick your brain this afternoon for a few things. First, let me ask you, do you love your job?
Absolutely. Well, I get to travel. That's one of the major benefits of being in global transaction banking is you get to go all over the world.
So how did you end up being in banking?
So I would call myself one of those accidental bankers. So out of university where I studied politics and economics, I went to work in a consulting firm, and that first day on the job they were sort of picking people for various groups, they're picking for auto or general industries, and they sort of asked who has any background in macroeconomics, and I was like, well, I do, and they're like, good, you're going to banking.
So it wasn't really, I want to go into banking, it's kind of, okay.
Yeah, so I ended up in banking, and I worked on some bank mergers on the retail side, and then started working in, actually, my first foray into payments was working on debit card launches in the US back in the early 90s. So sort of got the understanding of payment systems and how they worked, and sort of was fascinated by kind of how money kind of fuels commerce.
Right.
And so it kind of fueled a kind of a career-long passion.
Well, here you are. I mean, and looking back, were you amazed by how things were happening, how payments were made? I mean, because I have to admit, from my point of view, it's just that transaction I make when I buy something, that's all I know about it. But the back end is far more complicated. It's
extremely complicated. I think the thing that was eye-opening for me, in the US, we still have a preponderance of paper checks. And some of the first work I did was actually rolling out those debit cards to replace check volume. And so I actually had to spend 6 months in a check processing site, you know, literally watching the trucks pull up into the back, pull these paper checks out, people on machines encoding amounts, running them through these big long, there are these IBM 3890 reader sorters, and watch this whole process. It looked like the post office. And I was like, I can't believe the country still works this way. And it's amazing that we still have those same machines today, you know, 25 years later.
Really? So when we look at financial technology, of course, that has tripled in 5 years. In fact, we know the amount of money being spent going to the billions. A lot of investment directed specifically to technologies that perhaps could be seen to undermine some of that traditional correspondent banking model. How do you think technology and fintech innovation is shaping transaction banking today?
Well, obviously there's been a lot of announcements and activity around things like blockchain technology or a lot of activity on the consumer side, kind of the consumer to business payment side. So digital wallets, mobile money, those sort of things have been very, very active. I think that what they've done is they've done a couple things. One is that they've awakened sort of the banking community that we need to be more aggressive and think about the future. We've all invested in infrastructure that's been in place for 30 some odd years. And I think that the interesting thing when you think about how technology has grown over the last several decades, you know, at least when I was in university, everything was in mainframes, and you actually literally saw people with green screens plugged into a mainframe. You had this very hub and spoke sort of model. And then in the rest of our lives, we've gone to move from that network to a distributed computing network via the internet to now a mobile network, which is sort of preponderance of how we connect, and we've gone point to point. However, that core infrastructure is still set in these big hubs. And so when I think about banking technology, we basically have no global rail to move money. You know, I can pick up my phone today and call anyone anywhere in the world, point to point. If I want to move money, it has to bounce around through a series of hubs and spokes around the world to get there. And you lose all the transparency, and there's no interoperability. So it's a real challenge to think about how we evolve that. But since every country has every payment system is local, thinking about how to evolve that in a consistent manner to drive the major routes is the biggest challenge. I think we're all here at Sibos here to talk about how we do that.
So you think because, I guess, you know, as you mentioned, it has been steeped in so many years of infrastructure building, and changing that isn't going to be easy either? I mean, or do you think there is a so-called quick fix solution?
I don't think there's a quick fix, but I also don't think it's tragically broken. I think that the misnomer or the misconception about all the new technology that's going to change everything. So I think that, you know, things like blockchain and even mobile wallets or digital money have a interesting set of use cases, and I think that they can transform how we communicate and send information about payments. But fundamentally, the settlement of money between institutions, from moving money from one bank account to another, is always probably going to remain with banks. I think central banks and regulators are all going to want that in one place where they can see it, store it, and think about it. And also from an AML, so anti-money laundering, or a know your customer standpoint, banks are kind of steeped in that activity. So I think we're always going to be the entry points for money. So I think that's going to change. I think on top of that, though, the evolution of these technologies can provide greater transparency and speed with which we communicate. The real debate now is for what and how much money do people want to spend doing it, and what's the real benefit to everyone. You know, it's great that if we're having dinner, we can split the check and I can send you money and you think it's in your account today. That's interesting, but, you know, do you want to spend what we're looking at in the US of several $1 billion to create an infrastructure that you can get paid 6 hours earlier? I don't know that's really worth it.
Earlier you mentioned standardization, and of course there is a move towards that, you know, ISO 20022. Will something like that, a global standard, I mean, how effective will that be?
It has the potential to be very highly effective. I think that the problem with standards is they take so long to evolve, and they can take, you know, decades for everyone to sort of adopt and move on to. But I think the ISO standard will enable us to better communicate the data, because as I mentioned earlier, interoperability is the biggest challenge. And so while a payment may flow, the information about that payment doesn't necessarily flow. So if you're a corporate trying to reconcile your accounts receivable, you can't do it, because you get electronic information in one way for payments, and you have paper invoices coming another way. So if you can standardize how that remittance information flows, you get a much higher straight-through rate. We have clients that we talk to in the corporate space who have 95% plus auto-reconciliation for checks they get with invoices because of optical character recognition software. However, they have 50% match rates for things on low-value kind of ACH-like payments, and so that's a problem. And so I think the ISO standard can address that and solve that issue. It's just a matter of how quickly people want to adopt it. But I think when you think about the big banks, the global banks and the major corridors for commerce, I think you'll see faster adoption there.
So the big banks will, but then again, the smaller banks may say, I'm not so keen. What's in it for me?
And so I think the interesting thing about correspondent banking, in my mind, I think we're at an unprecedented kind of a tipping point. And I think that global regulation has created some of this. When you think about the implications of Basel III and how banks operate and the value of liquidity and the risk in the system that the regulators are trying to rightfully sort of mitigate. And then I think also the technology we've been talking about and its ability to better link banks together. So I think, you know, SWIFT going to SWIFT 2.0 with the next model for SWIFT and them being able to help banks communicate more efficiently together creates a new model for banking. So I think that for us at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, we're thinking about correspondent banking in a new way. So I think about it, if I look at the airline industry as a model. So I live in New York City, and I fly United Airlines. But coming out here to Singapore, I flew Singair, but Singair is part of the Star Alliance. So my experience going from United to Singapore is relatively seamless. My status continues, I have somewhere, I can track it through the same app, so I can kind of get the same experience. And when I think about banking, to get to those smaller banks, I think it could be the same way. I think you start having alliances of banks that can know their local market, be very relevant in a local market, and you need to connect them together in a different way.
Okay, but it sounds like a playing field that, again, the big boys will have a greater advantage, and the smaller ones will feel, well, I have to tie up with one of these big boys in order to get on the bandwagon, and get a smooth ride.
Well, I think that when you talk about cross-border commerce, I think you're going to end up in a place like that. But I think ultimately, when I think about the next set of consumers, the people who are going to, where wealth is being created, it's here in Asia, or it's in Latin America, or parts of Africa. And inherently, payments are local. So I think those banks are going to be closest. Those smaller banks are going to know the local market. They're going to be tighter with the regulations, and they're going to know the customers. And so I think ultimately they're going to have an advantage on providing services into that country or out of that country. And then the global banks would be the connective points.
What about regulations across the pond? Do you feel that also has, you were talking about it, has that again been a boon or a bane for banks? I mean, has it helped them, or has it just made things more challenging with more regulation?
Well, I don't think that any individual set of regulations made it more difficult. It's the differences in regulations. Every market is treated a bit differently and approached it. So when you're a global bank like ourselves, thinking about what our home regulators want in the US versus what our European regulator would want, or some of the Asian regulators, it's just a different standard. And so trying to comply with that, particularly here in Asia, where you have a lot of regulators asking for good reasons for data privacy and others having everything onshore, it basically gets back to that model of, well, the local banks are now even more competitive. So I think it's going to change the way global banks think about how they do things in certain markets around the world.
Well, let's talk a bit about the customers out there, because a lot of them, the millennials, 35 and under, they've grown up in a world where technology has been at their fingertips all the time. We've seen pictures of babies trying to swipe a magazine cover, not knowing what they were doing. But that's the world they're in, that's what they've grown up with. So has that been a challenge as well for organizations where, again, as you mentioned earlier, the infrastructure is a bit old-fashioned, but they also still have some old-fashioned clients, So you're trying to reach out to a very broad base, and you can't go one way or the other totally, right?
No, you can't, because we have when I think about domestically in the U.S., our consumer franchise goes all the way from, mass retail up to high net worth. A lot of those high net worth individuals don't use smartphones, don't want to use Venmo or PayPal. They're a very different model, and more in the personal banker model, versus some of the, your mass retail clients who are your younger people who want to do everything mobile, don't want to go into a banking center, and want to deal with it differently. So we've taken a partnership approach where we think about it. We can't build everything for everyone. So we have a core segment that we cater to in our technology, and then we try to play with all the players. So we were one of the first in Apple Pay. We're dealing with Samsung. So all the mobile wallet technologies, we're actively involved in those. That's how our clients want to transact. But ultimately, those technologies run on top of our rails or on top of our products. And so having a seamless way to integrate with those is to our advantage. And we have to keep that in mind, that we provide safety and security to our clients and enable them to securely transact in all those environments, and we protect their assets.
Is that the way moving forward, that basically you need to have just one solid base, and then customize how each person interacts with that platform? Because otherwise you'd have to have multiple platforms catering to each and every customer out there.
Yeah, so some of my colleagues who are more savvy than I in this area think about how we can wrap core pieces of our infrastructure in APIs, right? So we can provide the next level of integration, and so we can create that customized experience. Because to your point about the millennials, they're used to taking their smartphone and downloading what apps they want and having them operate safely in this environment because they've been screened through whatever portal they purchased them in, and they work well. So how do we do that in the banking context? How do you enable you to create that custom financial experience that you want safely on top of the account structure and the assets that we help you hold and manage?
Do banks understand Asia enough?
I can't speak for all banks, but I said we've been in Asia for 50 plus years. We're in 13 markets. We have teams here in Singapore, we have teams in Hong Kong, we have local country teams. So I think we understand the market really well.
How different would it be, Asia from the rest of the world? And has that been a challenge? I mean, especially for those who are moving in, who are coming into the emerging markets, some of it's quite new to them. And the way Asia works is quite different from the rest of the world.
So again, I can't speak for all banks that think about Asia, but Asia it's not one market. So I think sitting in New York, it's very easy to think of, oh yeah, Asia Pacific, and you think about the number of hour flight you have between here and Australia, or Australia to Tokyo, and the differences of how mainland China operates in Hong Kong itself, or here in Singapore, Malaysia, or Thailand. So it's a very, very diverse economy that's both global, and then also you're seeing a lot more intra-regional activity that creates an interesting opportunity. So I think that Asia is one where you have to sort of be invested, and you have to spend a lot of time. But when I come in here, New York is still, it feels a bit slow, and there's not a lot of optimism. People are still thinking about the slow growth of the U.S. economy and when a rate's going to rise and those things. And you come here in Asia, and you get to Singapore, and there's cranes everywhere. Everything's booming. The only place in the States that feels like Singapore is San Francisco, where there's a huge tech boom that's still been going on for a better part of a decade. So I think you get that feel of optimism. I think I love being here because you feel like, okay, the world's still moving, commerce is flowing, people are investing, things are happening.
Does Singapore surprise you?
Well, every time I come, it grows. In fact, Singapore keeps getting bigger.
Well, when was the last time you were here?
I was here probably 9 months ago.
Okay, that's about right, because we joke about how you leave for about that period, you come back, there's a brand new skyscraper, there's another new mall somewhere there, but again, they say this is the gateway to the rest of Asia. I mean, would you also give that kind of advice? Is this an easy starting point if you were to do Asia 101?
Well, I think for being an American, it's very easy, obviously, because most people speak English. The laws are very kind of known and friendly from a legal perspective. And then it's a hub, and so all of our clients who operate in other regions, you look at the buildings around us, and all the names in the buildings are all familiar. So I think it's an easy market from that standpoint. But I also think because it is that financial hub, a transit hub or commerce hub, given its strategic location in Southeast Asia, I think it's a natural place to start if you're looking for that. And also given the concentration of wealth that's been created here. I was watching a show recently on TV in the States that said that there are more millionaires in Singapore than anywhere else in the world.
Wow.
Which I was startled given this the population of Singapore. But it's just interesting. It's just a vast concentration of wealth and activity.
I know. Where are they? I've been looking for them.
I thought you were one.
Yeah. I know. Well, one more question about diversity in this day and age as well. How important is that, especially with multinational corporations, to look at the people they have and the people they're reaching out to as well? How important is that question of diversity?
So diversity is something that's kind of woven into the fabric of our bank. So I have the privilege of sitting on our Global Diversity and Inclusion Council. And so we think about those two things separately, diversity and inclusion. So we think about diversity is our workforce should reflect the communities in which we operate. So when I think about our teams here in Asia, they should reflect the clients that we serve in this region. In the States, whether they're in New York City or they're in the smaller towns and cities throughout the country, our bankers and service people, it should really reflect those communities. And so we try to think about that as we hire and promote and train people. Inclusion is the other side of that, is we want everyone to be able to bring their whole selves to work and think whether they are of a different race or gender or sexual orientation, that they can really feel comfortable and contribute and be part of that culture. That's kind of what we value as a bank.
And you feel that they can when they bring their culture, that adds value to the bank?
Absolutely, absolutely does. It adds a richness to the bank that makes it more personal.
Right.
Banks can feel like very impersonal, monolithic things, but when you have a person sitting across from you at the table helping you with your problems, and they understand who you are and they feel familiar to you, that's very helpful. It creates a better, long-lasting relationship.
Well, Ethan, just a quick question. So you're here in Singapore. Is there something you love to do every time you come? Is there some food you always... What do you remember from the food?
So it's definitely the street food. So the hawker centers are definitely my favorite. I love spicy food.
Okay.
And I'll always have to definitely stop and get some pepper crab or chili crab while I'm here too.
Okay, spot on. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Well, what an extraordinary man. And now I'm joined hotfoot from the Technology Forum by three panelists to talk about cybertech. And cybercrime costs the global economy billions of dollars each year, affecting individuals and institutions right across the board. Welcome to you three gentlemen. And I think you should introduce yourself, starting with you, Mark.
Mark Clancy, I'm the CEO of Soltra.
Good to have you here.
Koen Voormeulen, I'm responsible for cash and payment systems in the Central Bank of the Netherlands.
You've got a slightly longer title, but welcome to you.
Thank you.
Murray.
Hello, I'm Murray Walton and I'm Chief Risk Officer of Fiserv.
Lovely. So guys, you did the Technology Forum. How did it go? I hear it was action-packed, hardly a seat to be had.
It was, and we had a lot of polling questions for the audience and got some interesting feedback. And a few things we didn't expect on the panel.
Like what?
So we did a number of questions, but one of them that struck me is that the amount of information sharing about cyber threats, at least the awareness in the audience, was very low as to what their institutions were doing. We gave a mock scenario and we asked them to respond what they would do, who they'd involve. And they would all involve their executive management, many would involve the regulators, some would involve law enforcement. But very few were saying they were sharing information about what happened to them to other financial institutions.
Well, I get that impression it's slowly getting more coverage, isn't it, when it comes to executive boards and senior leadership teams. But there still is a long way to go, isn't there, with people making it a top priority. I mean, do you think cybercrime is the biggest threat that we face at the moment?
Well, it was interesting. So we believe, based on our occupations, of course, that this has replaced virtually all other risk in our financial services space because it's existential. If we should suffer a massive data destruction event or financial fraud on a large scale, trust is so integral to the brand and the confidence in every financial services firm. It becomes an existential threat given the increasing capabilities of the threat actors.
So let's have a look at these threats, Koen. What do you think are the biggest threats facing financial institutions at the moment?
Well, as Murray said, there's a lot of interest for cybersecurity. When it is about individuals, of course, they are caring about their own money. But when it is about institutions, it becomes really problematic because then total institutions can get into trouble and the financial stability of the whole sector can be at stake, and then problems are really substantial.
So what are the biggest threats though? What do you think we need to look out for?
So in quantity, they've been the financially motivated attacks have been stealing information to steal money. But on the risk basis, it's really the destructive attacks that are trying to disable or destroy the infrastructure from functioning that pose the most systemic risk. So you sort of have a frequency track that impacts clients of the institution and the leadership and has reputational risk, and you have potential systemic risk and interconnectivity risk from these destructive and disabling attacks that you're starting to see as well. And
how are these threats actually translating into risks for the financial system, Murray?
Well, so we really can look at this on four levels. The elemental level is system availability, and a bad actor can simply compromise the availability of systems that our institutions use to communicate with each other or use to communicate with or serve customers. So you would have availability compromises that would be problematic, financial fraud for obvious reasons. Data exposure erodes confidence in our brands, and of course it abets in some ways that financial fraud. The risk I'm really worried about, candidly, is the risk of data destruction and data integrity. If we all woke up one morning and those systems of record in our financial institutions were corrupted in some fashion, that would be an almost cataclysmic event for confidence in the financial system. And the sort of panic that might ensue and just the massive amount of recovery effort makes that the one that keeps me up at night.
But there's mixed messages at the moment. We're talking about technology, we need to embrace it, you need to adopt it in order to stay one step ahead of the game. But yet technology exposes you to the biggest risk, doesn't it, Koen?
Yes, it does, but it's more than a technology issue. It's technology on the one hand, which should try to keep out, of course, all the cyber risks, but also be prepared for once you are hit successfully by an attacker, how you are able to recover your operations quickly and safely. So that's a technology part, but also, I would say, an awareness part in the organizations. People need to be aware, because many of the successful cyber attacks started with somebody clicking on an email he shouldn't have clicked on. That's a very simple thing, but that's how it starts normally.
But Mark, technology is always evolving, isn't it? So hackers always seem to be one step ahead of the game. So what's your response?
So there's two pieces. One, infrastructures need to maintain a high state of hygiene. You know, if you look at the top 10 vulnerabilities that are being exploited by the most sophisticated attackers, 7 of them are more than 3 years old. There's no reason those should be in the infrastructure. And so if we can tell each other what the attackers are doing and what they're using and prioritize mitigation of those particular issues, we can make the attackers work harder. And if we can use standards and automation, we can make the defenders spend less energy per unit of defense, and we can start to tackle the economics of the problem, so the attackers' costs go up and the defenders' costs go down.
So how do you get a sense that the community is tackling these risks today? And what should they be doing in the future if they're not doing it already?
Well, I think that there's a simple acknowledgement that our collective wisdom and strength actually outflanks the enemy. That for all the numbers of hackers, from everyone operating out of mother's basement to sophisticated boiler rooms, here, there, and everywhere, the fact is, if we work together as an ecosystem, and there are more of us, we're highly disciplined, organized, and frankly, we're pretty well funded collectively. And we're fighting an enemy who, for all of his growing sophistication, is still operating in disjointed pockets. And so there is a great deal to be gained by disregarding one's competitive impulses, one's desire to shield bad news about one's own brand, and simply join forces, because collectively we have a great deal more wisdom and strength than the people we're arrayed against.
And has the industry got an appetite to join forces and collaborate?
Increasingly so, I would say. I think Mark is in a very interesting position as head of Sultra, where this is a really terrific example of industry collaboration.
Mark.
Yeah, so what we did is we realized that we had a problem, and we were sharing threat information manually. And I used to joke that our most important tool was Microsoft Notepad, because as we cut and paste all the threat data from the emails that came in into the tools and systems that we had. And we realized we had to do the same kind of things we did in the securities market. We need to have a standard way of describing a trade. We need a standard way of describing a threat. We need a centralized way of clearing the trade to move it back and forth. Similarly to what we did with other protocols, we have to do the same thing in the cyberspace. And that's what we did through the FSISAC community. So all 6,000 financial institutions are part of that, and using technology we built in Sultra on open standards. So we can have that interchange, and so we can shorten the time from when we become aware of a threat to when we decide what to do and act on it, so we get within the window the attackers are operating, instead of, unfortunately, the 205 days that typically elapse from an initial intrusion until the defender realizes it occurred.
So when people leave Sibos 2015 and they think about cybersecurity, I want you to think of one key thing you'd like them to walk away with. So it's a soundbite I'm looking from all of you. So if I can start with you, Mark, what do you want them to think about?
I think it's a combination of people, process, and technology. Hire well, supervise them carefully. Process, strong process, followed consistently with, frankly, real penalties for failure to do so, is essential. Technology is only one of 3 legs of that stool. There are certainly important technology defenses, but it's really about people, process, and technology.
Koen.
I would say in earlier times, prevention and later detection of cyber incidents was important, but now more and more the response part is important. I think every company can count on the occasion that once it will be attacked successfully. So the best defense will be to be able to recover very quickly, because then I mean, the damage of an attack is not so big anymore, and that is a very difficult thing. It requires out-of-the-box thinking. You need to be able to recover while your system is still under attack. That's difficult, but that's the challenge for the future.
And Mark?
I'll give you the really short answer. If you're doing it alone, you'll fail.
Yeah, so work together, collaborate. Yes. So connect, debate, collaborate. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for bringing the Technology Forum to life, and we wish you every success for the rest of Sibos. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to introduce my final guest, which is actor Badshaw of Catalytic Innovations Group, and he's also one of the moderators on Tuesday's InnoTribe sessions. Actor, lovely to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Now, you've got a fascinating background. I know you used to work for Microsoft. You've got philanthropy, if I can say it right, yes, I got it out, running through your veins. So just bring to life your background for people that may not know you.
So I'm an architect by training, and I moved from architecture and social development into the nonprofit sector, where I focused on technology and development and how do you bring technology into the social sector. And then I've been running Microsoft's corporate philanthropy for the last decade. And my interest has been, as our keynote speaker this afternoon said, to really look at how technology can transform the underserved community.
Indeed, and that's a passion of yours, isn't it? That financial inclusion. How do you crack that? At the moment, there's a couple of major forces happening in the world, aren't there? You've got the millennials. How do you crack that one? But let's start by looking at, say, the current refugee crisis. And people, wherever they are around the world, whether they're a refugee or happen to luckily have a roof over their head, need to be able to transact financially. They need access to the economy. So what can be done about those people that don't have a stable home at the moment? And we're talking about 60 million people, according to the United Nations, are migrants, so don't have a place of their own that they can call home. I mean, that's a shocking amount.
It is, and you know what is so, if you look at what is the one major possession that these individuals are taking with them, is a mobile phone.
Yeah.
Apple is getting free advertisement because every single refugee that is being shown on TV has got an iPhone in their hands. The question is, what can we do to provide services through that device, which is with them, in a way that can help them? Now, Google, Facebook, and others are all providing them with lots of different services, mapping, ways in which they can actually trace out their migratory routes, how they can communicate, send text messages back to their family that they made it to one part. But the financial piece is critical. And this is really the call to arms, if I may say so, to this group here. We have the technology, we have the ability. We need to focus on them. In Peru right now, the large financial institutions are meeting. They're also talking about the underserved community and emerging markets. I think that if you can bring these two together, we can have solutions that can easily allow for these large financial institutions to make it easy for them to carry their financial resources on a mobile wallet and then use it wherever they want.
So is it achievable? I mean, is the technology, I take it, is there. What's stopping those people getting the full connection? Are traditional banks still turning these people away and they don't want to make that final connection where they can access this money?
I think that part of it is that, you know, once you leave and run away, you're leaving things behind. If there is a way in which you can carry it on a mobile wallet and then you can access it in another country, then it makes, you know, much more sense. Then it's also the question of how do you mitigate some of the transaction costs for them? How do you lower fees? What kinds of things that you can make available so there is a secure way for them to be able to access that?
So how would you like it to be done then? What's your vision?
My vision is that what comes out of our meeting tomorrow is that we get people very excited, and that out of that there will be a few people that will actually start creating new services and solutions that will get linked into the mainstream financial sector so that it can scale, that it just does not remain. Because right now you've got solutions, you know, working here in Kenya, you've got little solutions in, you know, different parts of the world, but it actually has to become part of the larger market.
And for the millennials as well. I mean, this will be music to their ears. They want this technology.
And for the millennials, they're not even looking at a bank, right? They're basically looking at what is my financial wallet. You know, for them, bank is no longer a entity. So how do you And it's the exact same thing. What you do to service the millennials, you will be able to do to service the immigrants and the refugees.
Do you think it's the same product, or does it need a slightly different
It's actually
feel to it?
It's different products, because most millennials who are actually going to be able to use technology are going to use it on a smartphone and are going to access it through an app. Whereas for those that are actually coming out with 2G devices and feature phones, you've got to come up with a SMS related technology along with the smartphone technology so that they can actually utilize it in a far more effective way.
And which countries do you think need this the most at the moment?
Well, there are a couple of different things, right? So when you look at it from a market perspective in terms of what can be done, where can you service the most people? Obviously, India and some of these, Indonesia, become very critical markets from a market perspective. But when you look at it from a refugee crisis today, the big zone is the Syrian refugee crisis, right? I mean, people that are coming out of there, because these people, unlike other refugees, are not economic refugees. They're educated, they've got, well, they're all wearing jeans, they've got t-shirts, they've got clothes, they're spending the money to move across. And that's a market base that one should be able to service because they are educated. And they have used this technology.
And I'm not quite sure of the figures, but it's anything from 1 million to 2 million.
Yes, and it's huge, and they're coming out in droves. And now with, even more bombings happening in Syria, you're going to see even an accelerated role.
Well, I'm glad someone like you is actually bringing this to the table. So from the Inner Tribe session tomorrow, what else can we expect apart from looking at making money more accessible to people that need it the most?
I think that, what is fascinating about Inner Tribe, that it is actually a tribe of people that are looking at new innovations in the financial sector. Whether it is coming from established organizations or whether they're coming from startups and entrepreneurs. And it's the collection of that group that is coming together to think more, what more can be done. Some, of course, looking at it from new technologies and how technologies are changing and we should be able to adapt it. But others looking at it as to what is the new markets. And the new markets are the millennials, the new markets are financial inclusion for the underserved, and then, of course, right now, looking at it from the refugee and migrant crisis. And it's really focusing on all of these three, which kind of allows you to look at what can you do creatively to bring about change that leads to innovation and impact. And I think that's what the Inner Tribe community is all about.
Well, it sounds fascinating. I hope you have a great discussion. Thank you for bringing your passion on Sibos TV. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it.
And I believe as well we'll be talking to you later on in the week about financial inclusion on Sibos TV, and it'd be great as well to find out how your session went. Well, thank you for watching, and tomorrow don't forget that we'll be looking at standards and real-time payments. And Steve and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for Good Morning Sibos. Just to let you know, it broadcasts live at 8:30 in the morning, so make sure you set your alarm. See you then.